Okay, this is Rayjay2 here, and back in my younger days, my way back in the younger days, I used to play Nintendo, the Nintendo Entertainment System. I was introduced to it by my cousin, and she showed me a bunch of games, starting with Super Mario Brothers, and I loved all the games she had. She had a ton of games. From what I remember, she used to work at a video store or something, so she would always have these cartridges, NES cartridges. I think they were called tapes back then. Like, oh hey, I got a new Nintendo tape for you to try out because back in the '80s it was like you had tapes, like VHS tapes and cassette tapes. So pretty much everything that you popped into your player, whether to watch a movie or to listen to music, was a tape back then. So you had different Nintendo tapes, is what they called them, which is kind of weird. But one of these games, or no, at some point she promised me like a huge. She was going to give me all of her games. I was like, oh, that's great. Eventually, I got a box. It had like 6 or 7 games in them. It wasn't all of her games, but I think it was the ones that no one else wanted, or because it certainly seemed like it. There was a lot of weird things in there. One of the games that I had that I was super excited to play was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for the NES. Now I played it. I thought the cover looked cool. The but every time I would play it, the same thing would happen. I would load up the game. I would walk a few feet. I would get hit by lightning. I would get a game over, and that's literally everything. That's how the game went for me all the time, because I didn't know how to play it properly. So it was a disaster. Years later, I would discover how to actually play the game, and it's kind of bad. It's more of a walking simulator than anything else. But um, I remember a couple things about this game. Growing up, I remember that it was one of the few NES games that I had, so I would always play Super Mario Brothers or the Addams Family, even Paperboy, because I could never get the hang of this game. I could never understand what it's like or how you were actually able to do it. I tried so hard to figure out what this game was about or how to get past that, like the first few screens. It never happened because it was just that obscure. It's like, you want this game, have it for free. I didn't pay a damn thing for this game. And if you can see, still the original codes, or I don't know what this 108 symbol is, but it was from the video store, and that's why it has that barcode. It's still from the old video store. And even on the back of the cartridge, it says, this is a protective label. If tampered with, customer must purchase this tape. I don't know if you can see that. You kind of can't. But even on the cartridge itself, there's a sticker labeling it as a tape, a Nintendo tape. So I'm not just making stuff up here. They actually called them Nintendo tapes back then, at least where I was at. Maybe it was different in your region or wherever you lived. Something interesting happened with me or with this game for some reason. As you can see, there's like a weird looking kind of a Two-Face type of a guy there. Now, I don't know how this happened, but somehow over time I became like afraid to look at this face. So I would just keep the cartridge face down in my collection, and I vowed to never look at it again. Around that time, I think I got the Sega Genesis, and eventually other games, and it was years later that I rediscovered my old box of NES stuff, and I said, hey, it's that old Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde came. I remember this face used to scare me. It doesn't scare me anymore. I don't know why, because it's kind of a goofy face. Then again, I used to scare easily back in the days. It wasn't just this face. It was scary images, like the Jack Nicholson Joker used to terrify me. I have a crazy story about watching that. It's like watching that in the theater. Well, here's some advice for your parents. Don't take your 3-year-old to see Batman, the 1989 movie with Jack Nicholson as the Joker, on the big screen, because he might get terrified. It might be too intense for younger viewers, especially back in the 80s where I was used to the Adam West Batman. If I'm pretty sure I watched the Adam West 60s Batman back then. But those are my memories of this game. I played it. I didn't understand it. Oh wait, but later on I would actually discover that how to actually play this game. It's a walking simulator. It was bad. I remember one time I took this game to my cousin's house because he had a working NES, because having a working NES back then was a big deal, because mine broke down and I couldn't play any of my games anymore. And I brought like the box of games that I had. Every single game worked except for this one. And this is the only game that people wanted to play because of the box. Or not the box, the cover art. And I kept telling everyone, this game is bad. You do not want to play this game. Yet everyone was looking at this and saying, oh no, wait, look, it looks so cool. He's like a, what is he? He's got scurvy or something. It has the Nintendo seal of quality, which means it runs on Nintendo. It doesn't mean like it's a quality game or anything. But yeah, later on I would figure out how to actually play it. It's not that great. I still plan on doing a full playthrough of this game one day. It's not that bad. It's just boring. And one day one of my goals one day is to get this cartridge that I grew up with, this cartridge that I remember having for pretty much most of my life already by now. Wow. I want to get this cartridge signed by James Rolfe, who's the angry video game nerd. I think having his signature on here would be kind of interesting, since he kind of did bring this game back to the... I want to say back to the spotlight, but this game was never in the spotlight. This was always an obscure, weird, horror Nintendo game. And from what I remember, the horror Nintendo games were really popular back then. Friday the 13th, the Nightmare on Elm Street. It's all like, Nintendo was big, but I remember kids back then, and they were like, oh, you want to play a scary Nintendo game? Here's Friday the 13th, and I probably would have been too scared to play it back then, which is kind of funny thinking about it now. I had no issues with this game, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because it was a different era back then. Games that looked cheesy back then were like, people liked them just based off the cover art alone. And I really want to know what people really thought about this game. Who rented this game? Did you grow up with this game like I did? Because this was one of the major NES games that I had, along with like Duck Hunt. I don't want to mention duplicates, but I really didn't have much games growing up. I had the Flintstones, the Rescue of Dino and Hoppy, and it wasn't a good game. You know what games I didn't have? I didn't have Zelda. I didn't have Metroid. I didn't play those games till years later down the line. No, I played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.